Hi, my name is Thomas R. Roese, and we're here today at my studio, which I call the Treehouse Studio. And I was going to look at a few drawings and show you what the kind of drawings I do, and then we'll take a quick look at a drawing that's in progress. So typically, I'd like to work this size, this larger size. This is 39 inches by 31 inches. And most of the drawings that I do, I refer to as urban landscapes. And you can see that this one is very complicated and very involved, and there's a lot of elements to it. But what we're going to look at a little bit later here today is something a little different that I'm working on, and that would be zeroing in on a detail of one of these drawings. For instance, this one I've been toying with the idea of taking just a small section of it, and then that would blow it up and make it much more intimate for the viewer. Each of my drawings I consider a visual short story, and all of the elements or all of the parts of the drawing are characters in that short story. The sky could be a character, a bolt or a brick or a piece of gravel could be a character in the short story. For instance, there's a drawing of mine in the Canton Art Museum's collection. The title is something like Arrangement of Blues. And it looks rather simple at first. It's a little bit farther away than the drawings I'm trying to work on now. It looks rather plain and simple, but if you start to analyze it, there are a lot of characters in that short story. There's the sky. The blue of the sky is very important in that one. There's a wall of bricks. There's a bed of gravel where the railroad tracks are. And each of those elements becomes a character in the story. Like each brick, think of it as a person. If you take that one brick away, that changes society. If you take one of those bits of gravel away, that changes the character of that whole crowd of gravel. And it helps you to interpret the story in a different way. I am not offended at all if you look at that drawing and you determine what your own short story might be. That might be different from what I had in mind when I was doing the drawing, and I think it would be a lot of fun if we could sit down and compare those different short stories, what I had in mind and what you see, and you might bring a whole different idea to the table that I hadn't considered that I would like a lot. So too bad we can't sit down and do that, but maybe sometime in the future we would be able to figure out a way to do that. Wouldn't that be fun? Anyway, I've got some small drawings here. These are only about 13 by 17 inches. And this is what I mean by making it a little bit more intimate. You're a little closer to the activity. And each of these elements, again, becomes a character in the short story. The title for this one is Blind Eye, or Blinded Eye, Blind Eye. And it's actually a reference to the federal government's lack of response to the COVID-19 pandemic, that the windows are sort of boarded up with these corrugated, I'm assuming they're fiberglass panels that allow some light to come into the structure, but it doesn't allow any of the employees to look out or any of us visitors to look in. And it's like the government having a blind eye to the needs of the American public, where we were short-sighted as to how to protect us during this pandemic. So that's the short story that I sort of have in mind for this one. But it was also an attempt for me to start experimenting on these visual details closing in, instead of showing like in that large drawing that big area. We're now looking at just a small area. And again, each of these parts for me are characters in this story and help convey more of the information to the viewer. And one last small one to look at, for instance, this sky area, all that blue is a very important character to this story. We won't go into the elements of it, how I interpret it, but this mass, and this mass become very important as they conflict with one another or get along with one another. This one's called Coupled, I believe. Yes, Coupled. So that's also a clue as to what the story might be. Sometimes the title is a clue, and sometimes it's also a contradiction. Let's look at a drawing that's in progress. And this one now is a little larger. It's taking that same idea and looking at a sort of a detail of the broader visual that we all can see. This is closing in a lot more, but by going larger on the paper, you become much more intimately involved with what's happening. Again, my goal is, after I do a few of these this size and get used to this idea of containing my broader view, I want to work up to that really large size that I showed initially. This one, again, the underlying short story is the lack of response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the working title right now is Tied and Bolted. There's some railroad ties up here, and you can see the bolts and rivets down through here. Each of those are elements or characters that indicate their own sort of response or lack of response. I also think that this one is rather confined in the amount of space that we're allowed to be in, and that it's almost claustrophobic. I think some of us who are being hunkered down and sheltering in place feel very confined and claustrophobic these days. We're not accessible to the freedom that Americans are used to, being able to go wherever we want to go, whenever we want to go there. And this one, I'm trying to sort of contain you in this small space and make you feel uncomfortable and claustrophobic. This is, like I said, the beginning of the drawing. It's all graphite. There's some white colored pencil here which will help me to explore more the depth of value change. Value is the amount of lightness or darkness in the drawing. Because I had these big areas to fill in with the graphite, I was using a woodless graphite pencil. Here it's a bit of a nub at this point, but it's the difference is a regular pencil is lead surrounded by wood. This one, the entire pencil is lead, and it's coated in like a vinyl, so that you could use the whole end of the pencil, the side of that sharpened pencil, and paint in broad areas of graphite. You can see that there's a lot of scribbling and energy going on, even though the final drawing, as you saw in those initial examples, looks kind of tight and organized. If you really study it up close, it's not as tight and organized and pristine as you initially thought. I have kind of a list of things that I do for each drawing. And the list would include, is it a composition that I can, that's very unusual and difficult, and perhaps I break a lot of rules? Is there a story that I can tell? Is there something small and unique that is a personal, private thing that I find amusing, or in some way it's gonna be my secret? So when you look at the drawing, you might not see this one little thing that drew me to this drawing. And is it a technical challenge for me? Each drawing I do, I try to make it harder than the previous one. My little secret on this one is actually two. It's going to be this element of sky up here, which is going to be this really pop of strong blue color. And my other little secret is the fun down here that's going to be rusty and light on it. There's something exciting to me that's going to happen there with the bright sort of orange and that light right on it, and creating these really strong cast shadows. So this is very abstract, big patterns, big bold patterns, and yet at the same time it presents to the viewer rather realistically. So the viewer who's sort of casually looking at it could identify with the realism, and the viewer who looks at it a little bit more carefully can see the underlying quality of the abstraction. I do use photographic reference for my drawings. I take the pictures myself. When I take the picture, I am working in my studio even though I'm out in the field, and I'm composing very carefully what I expect the drawing to be. When I get into the studio, then I make even more careful arrangements of the composition, like you looking through a viewfinder or something, a cardboard shape that I could adjust the composition. And I might add elements, I might take elements away. I don't worship the photograph. Photography is a whole other visual art form. Drawing's another one. Why would I just duplicate a photograph? That's not my goal. My goal is to interpret that photograph and bring to you something that I have to communicate with. So anyway, I'm glad you were able to visit me today in my treehouse studio, and hopefully we've covered a few things about what goes into one of my drawings at least. And thanks for viewing. My name is Thomas R. Roese.